The murder of Sherri Rasmussen. Welcome to BrightDawn's True Crime. Here we dive deep into mysterious disappearances, chilling criminal cases, and the stories that still leave investigators searching for answers years later. Turn down the lights, get comfortable, and let's uncover today's story. Disclaimer. This video is intended for educational, documentary, and entertainment purposes. The information presented is based on publicly available sources, court records, investigative documents, and media reports. Some dialogue and scene descriptions have been recreated for storytelling purposes. Viewer discretion is advised. Imagine spending your entire life doing everything right. You work hard in school. You build a successful career. You find the person you want to spend the rest of your life with. You make plans. You dream about the future. And then, one ordinary day, everything ends. Not because of an accident, not because of illness, but because someone has secretly become obsessed with your life. Someone who believes they deserve what you have, and someone who is willing to kill to get it. Tonight's story is about a woman named Sherri Rasmussen, a woman who should have lived a long and happy life. Instead, she became the victim of one of the most shocking murders in Los Angeles history. And for more than 20 years, her killer walked free. This is the story of Sherri Rasmussen. Long before she became the subject of a murder investigation, Sherri Rasmussen was simply a daughter. She was born on May 29, 1956, into a close-knit family that valued education, hard work, and kindness. The Rasmussen family was respected by friends and neighbors. Sherri grew up in California alongside her siblings in a loving household where achievement was encouraged but never forced. From an early age, it was obvious that Sherri was different. She was intelligent, exceptionally intelligent. Teachers often commented on her determination and maturity. While other children occasionally struggled with motivation, Sherri seemed naturally driven. She enjoyed learning, she enjoyed helping people, and she had a remarkable ability to connect with others. Family members later described her as thoughtful and compassionate. She was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, the kind of person who checked on friends when they were having a difficult time, the kind of person who genuinely cared. People trusted her, and perhaps that is why she eventually chose a career dedicated to helping others. As she grew older, Sherri's work ethic only became stronger. She pursued higher education and eventually entered the healthcare profession. Nursing was not simply a job for her, it was a calling. Former colleagues would later describe her as highly professional, incredibly organized, and deeply compassionate toward patients. But Sherri wasn't content with simply doing the minimum. She wanted to excel. And she did. By her late 20s, she had already achieved more than many people twice her age. She quickly rose through the ranks and became one of the youngest nursing directors in the area. For a woman in the mid-1980s, this was an impressive accomplishment. She was ambitious without being arrogant, confident without being intimidating. People naturally followed her leadership because she earned their respect. One colleague later said that whenever Sherri walked into a room, people felt reassured. She had that effect on people. She made them feel safe, she made them feel heard, and she made them feel important. Looking back now, it almost seems unfair, because Sherri had worked so hard to build a beautiful life, a life that was just beginning. Around this same period, another important person entered her life, a man named John Rutan. Friends described John as intelligent, ambitious, and successful. The two met, started dating, and quickly developed a strong connection. They shared similar values. Both were career-driven, both wanted a stable future, and both seemed genuinely happy together. Family members on both sides approved of the relationship. The couple appeared perfectly matched. As their relationship grew more serious, friends began talking about marriage. It seemed inevitable, and eventually that is exactly what happened. When Sherri and John got married, those closest to them believed they had found their happily ever after. Photographs from the wedding show, smiling faces, excitement, optimism, the beginning of a new chapter. Nobody looking at those photographs could have imagined how little time they had left together, because hidden somewhere beyond those wedding pictures, someone else was watching. Someone who was not happy about this marriage at all. Someone who believed Sherri Rasmussen had taken something that belonged to them. And although Sherri had no idea it existed, that resentment was quietly growing into something much darker, something dangerous. But before that danger would reveal itself, Sherri and John focused on building their future, a future that appeared bright, a future filled with possibilities, and a future that would soon be stolen away forever. When people later looked back at Sherri Rasmussen's life, one question kept coming up. Why her? Why would anyone want to hurt a woman who seemed universally liked? A woman with no criminal connections, no dangerous lifestyle, no known enemies. The answer, as investigators would eventually discover, wasn't hidden in Sherri's past. It was hidden in someone else's. And to understand what happened to Sherri, we first need to talk about the man she married. John Ruetten was, by most accounts, exactly the kind of man many parents hoped their daughters would marry. He was educated, successful, hard-working. He had built a promising career and appeared to have a stable future ahead of him. Friends described him as friendly and intelligent, someone who got along easily with others. He wasn't known for creating drama. He wasn't the kind of person people associated with danger or controversy. To outsiders, John and Sherri appeared to be building the perfect life together, the kind of life many young couples dream about. A nice home, successful careers, long-term plans, a future family. They were newly married and still enjoying the excitement that comes with the beginning of a new chapter. Like many newlyweds, they spent time talking about where they wanted to be 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later. They discussed careers, vacations, children, retirement, all the ordinary conversations that couples have when they believe they have an entire lifetime ahead of them. Unfortunately, someone else was paying attention to that future as well, and they hated what they saw. Years before John met Sherri, he had dated another woman. At the time, there was nothing unusual about it. Relationships begin, relationships end. People move on. It happens every day. When the relationship ended, nobody thought much about it. Friends certainly didn't view it as something that would matter years later. Why would they? People break up all the time, but what nobody realized was that while John had moved on, someone else may never have done so. As the years passed, John built a new life. He met Sherri. He got married. He started planning a future. And yet somewhere in the background, pieces of the past remained, quietly, patiently, almost invisibly. The problem with obsessions is that they rarely announce themselves. They don't arrive with warning signs. They grow silently. And by the time anyone notices them, it can already be too late. After their wedding, Sherri and John moved into a townhouse in Van Nuys, California. To them, it represented a fresh start, their own space, their own future. The home wasn't extravagant. It wasn't a mansion, but it was theirs, and they were proud of it. Friends occasionally visited, family members stopped by. The couple settled into routines that felt normal and comfortable. Sherri continued advancing her nursing career. John focused on his own work. Evenings were often spent discussing plans for the future. Those who knew them later said they genuinely appeared happy. Not perfect. No marriage is perfect, but happy. And perhaps that is what makes this case so heartbreaking. Because when tragedy strikes a troubled relationship, people often search for warning signs. Arguments, affairs, financial problems, something, anything. But in this case, there appeared to be very little. Most people who knew the couple believed they were building a successful life together, which made what happened next even harder to understand. After the murder, investigators would spend years looking back through old memories, old conversations, old interactions, old events that once seemed completely meaningless. And among those memories were a handful of strange moments. At the time, nobody thought much about them. They seemed insignificant, the kind of thing people forget almost immediately. But hindsight has a way of turning ordinary moments into important clues. Some friends later recalled hearing about a woman who seemed unusually interested in John's life. Others remembered stories that felt slightly strange. Nothing alarming, nothing that suggested violence. Just small moments that, viewed years later, felt different. Uncomfortable. Like pieces of a puzzle that nobody knew they were collecting. Unfortunately, those pieces wouldn't make sense until much later. At the time, life simply continued. Sherri went to work. John went to work. Their future appeared secure. But while they were busy building their lives, someone else may have been quietly watching them. Watching their marriage. Watching their home. Watching the life they had created together. And with every passing month, that hidden resentment may have been growing stronger. By early 1986, Sherri was only 29 years old. 29. An age when most people are just beginning the best years of their lives. She had already achieved remarkable success professionally. She had a husband she loved, supportive family members, close friends, and every reason to believe the future would be bright. If you had met her then and asked where she expected to be 10 years later, she probably would have described a happy life. A family, career success, new goals, new experiences, the ordinary dreams that make life meaningful. She had absolutely no reason to believe danger was approaching, because danger wasn't lurking in a dark alley. It wasn't a random stranger, it wasn't someone breaking into houses across the city. The threat was far closer than anyone realized, and in just a matter of days, Sherri Rasmussen's life would come to a violent end. An end that would launch one of the most controversial murder investigations in Los Angeles history. And when detectives arrived at the crime scene, they would immediately make an assumption that would send the investigation down the wrong path for more than 2 decades. In the next part of this story, we arrive at February 24th, 1986, the day everything changed. The day Sherri Rasmussen was found dead inside her own home, and the day a killer almost got away with murder forever. Before we continue, it's important to remember something. On the morning of February 24th, 1986, Sherri Rasmussen had no idea her life was about to change forever. For her, it was simply another Monday, another ordinary day, the kind of day that most people experience and then forget. There were no dramatic warnings, no obvious signs of danger, no indication that within a few short hours she would become the center of a mystery that would remain unresolved for decades. And perhaps that is what makes this case so unsettling. Because the worst moments in life rarely announce themselves beforehand. The day began much like any other. Sherri and John followed their normal routine: breakfast, conversation, preparing for the day ahead. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing seemed out of place. If there were concerns or worries, nobody around them noticed. Like countless couples across America, they went about their day expecting to see each other again later that evening. John eventually left for work. Sherri remained at home. It was a completely normal decision, one that would later become incredibly important to investigators. Because as the hours passed, something happened inside that townhouse. Something nobody witnessed. Something that would remain a mystery for years. At that moment, however, nobody knew anything was wrong. The city continued moving. People went to work. Traffic filled the streets. Life carried on as usual. And somewhere inside her home, Sherri was spending what would become the final hours of her life. As the afternoon turned into evening, John attempted to contact his wife. At first, there was nothing concerning about it. People missed phone calls all the time. Maybe she was busy. Maybe she had stepped out. Maybe she was speaking with friends or family. There were dozens of innocent explanations. But as more time passed, concerns slowly began replacing confidence. Repeated attempts to reach her produced the same result. Nothing. No answer. No response. The silence continued. And while silence can sometimes mean nothing at all, occasionally it means everything. Eventually, John decided to head home. He likely expected to find a simple explanation waiting for him. A misunderstanding, a forgotten errand, something ordinary. Instead, he was about to walk into a scene that investigators would spend decades trying to understand. As John approached the townhouse, everything appeared normal. Nothing immediately stood out. No flashing lights, no neighbors gathered outside, no obvious signs of trouble. If anything, the property looked exactly as it always had. But appearances can be deceiving. When he entered the home, he immediately sensed something was wrong. The atmosphere felt different, unnatural. Some items appeared out of place. Drawers had been opened. Objects were scattered around the house. The scene was confusing, disorienting. And then he found Sherri. Emergency services were contacted immediately. Within a short time, police officers, detectives, and forensic personnel arrived at the residence. What they discovered would shock everyone involved. Sherri had suffered severe injuries during an apparent struggle inside her own home. The attack had been extremely personal, extremely aggressive, far beyond what many investigators typically associated with a simple burglary. Yet, strangely, that wasn't the conclusion many of them reached. Instead, as they examined the scene, a different theory quickly emerged, a theory that seemed simple, perhaps too simple. To investigators arriving at the scene, the explanation appeared straightforward. The home showed signs of disruption. Items had been moved, drawers had been searched. Certain belongings appeared to be missing. At first glance, it looked exactly like what detectives expected to see following a residential burglary. Perhaps intruders entered the home. Perhaps Sherri interrupted them. Perhaps a confrontation occurred. Perhaps the situation escalated unexpectedly. For investigators, this theory solved several problems immediately. It explained the condition of the house. It explained the apparent struggle. And it provided a suspect category. Unknown burglars. Case direction established. But there was one problem. The more carefully some people looked at the evidence, the less convincing that explanation became. Because crime scenes tell stories, and this crime scene appeared to be telling two completely different stories at the same time. One story suggested burglary, the other suggested something deeply personal. And those two stories did not fit together. As forensic specialists examined the townhouse, several unusual observations began emerging. Some aspects of the scene appeared genuine. Others felt staged, almost as if someone wanted investigators to see a particular narrative, to believe a particular version of events. Yet in 1986, forensic technology was nowhere near what it is today. Many of the tools detectives rely upon now simply did not exist. Evidence that might seem crucial today was either overlooked or impossible to analyze properly at the time. And because of that, certain questions remained unanswered. Questions that would haunt the case for decades. Who entered the house that day? Why was Sherri specifically targeted? Was this truly a burglary? Or had someone carefully created the appearance of one? At the time, nobody knew, but one person almost certainly did. The individual responsible. And as investigators worked the case, that person was watching, listening, waiting, and most likely feeling confident. Because from their perspective, everything appeared to be going according to plan. Within a relatively short period, investigators became increasingly focused on the burglary theory. It was familiar, comfortable, understandable. Unfortunately, investigations can sometimes become trapped by first impressions. Once people believe they know what happened, they often begin interpreting new information through that belief. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. Detectives are not immune to it. Neither are juries. Neither are ordinary people. And in this case, that early assumption would have enormous consequences. Because while investigators were focusing on possible burglars, they were paying far less attention to another possibility, a possibility sitting much closer to home, a possibility connected directly to Sherri's personal life, a possibility involving someone who had a reason to care deeply about her marriage, someone who, according to later evidence, may never have truly accepted that marriage at all. But for now, that possibility remained largely ignored. And because it was ignored, the person responsible would continue living freely for years. Years that eventually became decades. In the next part of our story, detectives begin examining people connected to Sherri and John. And one particular name starts appearing again and again. At first, it seems insignificant, almost irrelevant. But eventually that name will become the key to unlocking the entire mystery. And once investigators finally understand its importance, everything about the case changes. For investigators, one of the most difficult parts of any case is separating what is possible from what is probable. Just because someone could have committed a crime doesn't mean they did. And just because someone seems suspicious doesn't mean they're guilty. The challenge is following evidence wherever it leads, even when that path becomes uncomfortable, even when it points towards someone nobody wants to suspect. And in the Rasmussen case, one particular name would eventually become impossible to ignore. But in 1986, very few people were paying attention to it. As detectives worked to understand Sherri's life, they naturally began examining people close to her. Family members, friends, neighbors, co-workers, anyone who might provide insight into who she was and whether anyone had a reason to target her. The problem was that almost everyone told the same story. Sherri was well-liked, respected, successful, kind. The more people investigators interviewed, the less likely it seemed that she had been involved in any serious personal conflict. Yet one detail continued surfacing in conversations, not because people thought it was important, but because it was simply part of the couple's history. Before marrying Sherri, John had dated another woman. At first, investigators didn't see much significance in this. People have previous relationships. It's normal. In most cases, former partners have absolutely nothing to do with future crimes. And so the information was largely placed to one side. Another detail, another name, nothing more. At least that's what many investigators believed. The woman in question was named Stephanie Lazarus. At the time, she was building a career in law enforcement. Those who knew her often described her as intelligent, determined, and competitive. She had a reputation for being driven, focused, someone who achieved her goals through persistence. On the surface, there was nothing remarkable about that. Many successful professionals share those qualities. But years later, when investigators began re-examining the case, they would discover details that cast those same qualities in a very different light. Because determination can sometimes become obsession. And persistence can sometimes become something much darker. The question was where that line had been crossed, and whether anyone had noticed. One of the strange things about major criminal investigations is that warning signs often seem obvious in hindsight. After the truth emerges, people begin remembering things differently. Conversations that once seemed harmless suddenly feel important. Comments that were ignored suddenly sound alarming. Moments that appeared insignificant suddenly take on new meaning. Years later, several individuals would describe interactions that felt unusual. Stories involving jealousy, stories involving resentment, stories suggesting that certain feelings from the past had never fully disappeared. None of these accounts alone proved anything. People gossip, people exaggerate, people misremember. Investigators knew they couldn't rely on rumors. They needed evidence, real evidence. The problem was that evidence wasn't leading them toward Stephanie. It wasn't leading them toward anyone. The case had begun slowing down, and as weeks became months, the chances of solving it appeared to be fading. While the investigation struggled, Sherri's family faced a different challenge: accepting what had happened. For them, this wasn't a case file. This wasn't a puzzle. This wasn't a news story. This was their daughter, their sister, their loved one, the person they expected to see at birthdays, family gatherings, future celebrations. And now, she was gone. Yet, despite their grief, family members remained determined. They wanted answers. They wanted accountability. Most importantly, they wanted investigators to keep looking, because something about the burglary explanation never felt right to them. The violence seemed too personal, too focused, too deliberate. Many family members believed there had to be more to the story, and in time, their instincts would prove remarkably accurate. Months passed, then years. Eventually, the Rasmussen investigation became what detectives refer to as a cold case. The file still existed. The evidence still existed. But active progress became increasingly rare. New leads dried up, witness memories faded, potential suspects moved on with their lives, and, as happens in many unsolved cases, public attention gradually disappeared. For most people, the story was over. A tragic crime, a failed investigation, a mystery that would likely never be solved. But there was one person who probably appreciated that outcome more than anyone else: the person responsible. If they were watching events unfold, they had every reason to feel relieved. The burglary theory had survived. Years were passing. Evidence was aging. Witnesses were forgetting. The danger of being identified appeared to be shrinking. And yet, hidden inside the original investigation was a tiny piece of evidence. A piece so small that nobody realized how important it would eventually become. At the time, technology simply wasn't advanced enough to reveal its secrets. But one day, that would change. And when it did, the entire case would be turned upside down. The late 1980s became the 1990s. The 1990s became the 2000s. And during those years, forensic science evolved dramatically. Methods that once seemed impossible became routine. Evidence that once appeared useless suddenly became valuable. Cold cases across America began reopening. Investigators started solving crimes that had remained mysteries for decades. Families who had lost hope finally received answers. And somewhere inside the Rasmussen case file sat evidence waiting for technology to catch up, waiting for someone to take another look, waiting for the moment when science could reveal what human investigators had missed. That moment was approaching, slowly, quietly, but inevitably, because while memories fade, evidence doesn't. And hidden within that evidence was the identity of the person responsible for everything. The person who had entered Sherri Rasmussen's home, the person who had forever changed countless lives, the person who believed they had gotten away with it. In the next part of our story, a new generation of detectives reopens the case. And a single piece of forensic evidence begins pointing toward a suspect nobody expected. A suspect who, by then, had spent years enforcing the law rather than running from it. And once that discovery is made, the countdown toward one of the most shocking arrests in modern true crime officially begins. By the early 2000s, nearly 2 decades had passed since Sherri Rasmussen lost her life. 20 years. For many investigations, that amount of time is devastating. Witnesses move away, memories fade, documents get misplaced, leads disappear, and eventually many cases become little more than dusty files sitting on shelves. But occasionally, time works in the opposite direction. Occasionally, the passing years create opportunities that never existed before. And in the Rasmussen case, that opportunity came in the form of science. Because while people forget, DNA doesn't. One of the advantages of a cold case review is that new investigators arrive without the assumptions of the original team. They aren't emotionally attached to old theories. They aren't trying to defend past decisions. They simply look at the evidence and ask a basic question. What if we've been wrong all along? That's exactly what began happening in the Rasmussen case. Fresh eyes examined old reports, old photographs, old witness statements, old forensic evidence, and almost immediately something stood out. The burglary theory wasn't nearly as strong as it had once seemed. In fact, some investigators were surprised it had remained the dominant explanation for so long. The more they studied the crime scene, the more it appeared that someone may have wanted police to believe it was a burglary. Those are two very different things. A real burglary and a staged burglary can look similar at first glance, but investigators trained in behavioral analysis know there are often subtle differences, and some of those differences appeared to be present here. The question was simple. If this wasn't a burglary, then what was it? Among the evidence collected back in 1986 was something investigators had never fully explored. During the struggle, Sherri had apparently fought back. She hadn't simply surrendered, she resisted, and in doing so, she may have left behind evidence from her attacker, evidence that remained preserved for years. At the time, forensic technology was limited. The significance of this evidence wasn't fully understood, but by the early 2000s, things had changed dramatically. DNA analysis had become far more sophisticated. Evidence once considered inconclusive could now provide answers. And when investigators revisited the biological evidence from the case, they realized they might finally have an opportunity. An opportunity that hadn't existed when Ronald Reagan was president. An opportunity that could identify the person responsible, or at the very least, eliminate suspects. Either outcome would move the investigation forward. For the first time in years, detectives felt something they hadn't felt in a long time: hope. As forensic testing progressed, detectives also revisited names connected to the original investigation. Family members, co-workers, friends, former acquaintances. And among those names was someone many investigators felt deserved another look: Stephanie Lazarus. Not because there was definitive evidence against her. Not yet. But because certain aspects of her connection to the case seemed unusual. Years earlier, concerns involving her had not received significant attention. Now, investigators wanted to understand why. Why had certain information been overlooked? Why had some leads never been fully explored? And perhaps most importantly, what would happen if they looked at those leads today? The deeper detectives dug, the more questions emerged. Questions that made them increasingly uncomfortable, because the picture developing in front of them did not resemble a random burglary. It resembled something else entirely. Something personal, something emotional, something that may have begun years before Sherri ever walked down the aisle. Imagine being an investigator reviewing this case. You discover that the victim married a man who previously dated another woman. That woman allegedly struggled to move on. That woman later became a police officer. And the victim was targeted in a crime that appeared deeply personal. Would that prove anything? No, absolutely not. People experience heartbreak every day without committing crimes. Millions of former partners live perfectly normal lives. Investigators understood this. They couldn't allow speculation to replace evidence, but they also couldn't ignore possibilities. Their responsibility was to follow facts wherever those facts led, even if those facts pointed towards someone wearing a badge, because one reality exists in every profession. Doctors can commit crimes, lawyers can commit crimes, judges can commit crimes, and police officers can commit crimes. Nobody is automatically excluded from suspicion simply because of their job. That principle would become incredibly important as the investigation continued. Then came the moment investigators had been waiting for. The forensic testing, the evidence collected decades earlier, finally underwent modern analysis. For detectives, this was the kind of moment that can change everything. Years of uncertainty, years of questions, years of frustration, all potentially answered by a laboratory report. And when the results arrived, investigators immediately understood something significant had happened. The findings didn't point toward an unknown burglar. They didn't support the theory that had dominated the case for years. Instead, they pointed somewhere unexpected, somewhere deeply troubling, because the DNA profile appeared consistent with someone investigators already knew. Someone connected to the victim's husband. Someone who had existed on the edge of the case for years. Someone many people had stopped thinking about altogether. Stephanie Lazarus. After nearly 2 decades, the investigation had finally begun moving in a completely different direction. And for the first time, detectives believed they might actually know who they were looking for. But knowing and proving are 2 very different things. Especially when your suspect is a veteran police officer. Investigators understood the situation they were facing. An arrest could not be based on suspicion. It could not be based on rumors. It could not even be based solely on theory. The case needed to be solid. Every detail needed to be verified. Every claim needed to be supported. Every step needed to withstand scrutiny. Because if they made a mistake now, they might never get another opportunity. And so detectives began quietly gathering information, reviewing records, conducting surveillance, re-examining timelines, comparing statements. Piece by piece, they built their case. Meanwhile, Stephanie Lazarus continued living her life, working, socializing, moving through her normal routines, unaware that investigators were slowly closing in. Or perhaps she suspected something. Nobody knows. What we do know is that after more than 20 years, the Rasmussen case was no longer cold. It was alive. And it was moving toward a confrontation that nobody could have imagined back in 1986, a confrontation that would eventually reveal what really happened inside that townhouse. In the next part of our story, detectives launch one of the most fascinating undercover operations in true crime history. A secret plan designed to obtain the evidence they need. A plan that would place investigators face to face with their prime suspect. And once that operation begins, the countdown to arrest becomes impossible to stop. Before we continue, I want to mention something that genuinely helps the channel. According to YouTube analytics, more than 90% of the people watching BrightDawn's True Crime are not currently subscribed. If you're enjoying this investigation and would like to see more long-form true crime stories like this one, consider subscribing. It costs nothing, it helps the channel tremendously, and it ensures you don't miss future cases. Now, let's get back to the story. By the time investigators began focusing seriously on Stephanie Lazarus, they faced a problem. Actually, several problems. First, more than 20 years had passed since Sherri Rasmussen lost her life. Second, their primary suspect was not an ordinary citizen. She was an experienced police officer, someone who understood investigations, someone who knew how evidence worked, someone who had spent years questioning suspects herself. And third, investigators needed more than DNA. They needed context. They needed statements. They needed to understand how Stephanie would react when confronted with information she wasn't expecting. So detectives came up with a plan that sounds more like something from a crime thriller than real life. And yet every part of it actually happened. Investigators knew they couldn't simply call Stephanie and accuse her of anything. If she became alarmed, she might immediately seek legal representation. She might stop talking altogether. And while that would absolutely be her right, detectives believed they first needed to understand how she would respond under pressure. So they developed a strategy. Instead of bringing her in as a suspect, they would invite her in as a witness. A witness connected to an old investigation, a routine conversation. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening, at least on the surface. The goal was simple. Keep her comfortable, keep her talking, and see what happened when unexpected questions entered the discussion. In June 2009, Stephanie Lazarus arrived for the interview. From the outside, she appeared calm, confident, relaxed. Why wouldn't she be? After all, more than 2 decades had passed. The Rasmussen case had spent years buried inside cold case files. Most people would assume it was ancient history. As the conversation began, investigators avoided direct accusations. Instead, they spoke casually. They discussed old relationships, old memories, events from years earlier. The atmosphere initially felt almost conversational, almost friendly. But beneath that calm surface, something important was happening. Detectives were carefully observing every response, every expression, every hesitation, every change in tone. Because sometimes what people say is less important than how they say it. Then investigators introduced a name, John Ruetten, Sherri's husband, Stephanie's former boyfriend, and almost immediately the tone of the conversation shifted. Not dramatically, not enough for an average person to notice. But detectives noticed, because that's what they were trained to do. For years, Stephanie had apparently maintained that the relationship was firmly in the past. Ancient history, nothing more. Yet as investigators explored the topic, they detected something interesting. Strong emotions. Strong enough that even decades later, they still seemed close to the surface. Again, this wasn't evidence of guilt. Not by itself. People can have emotional reactions to old relationships. That's normal. But investigators were beginning to see something they hadn't expected. The connection appeared far more significant than they had originally believed. And that realization would only become more important as the interview continued. As the conversation moved forward, detectives slowly introduced additional details. Information about the case. Information about the original investigation. Information that Stephanie likely hadn't expected them to mention. At first, her answers appeared confident, controlled, measured. But over time, subtle inconsistencies began appearing. Small contradictions, minor shifts in wording, tiny details that didn't quite align. Again, none of this proved anything. But experienced investigators understand something important. Truthful people generally don't need to remember a story. They remember an event. People attempting to manage information often focus on maintaining consistency instead. And maintaining consistency for more than 20 years is difficult, very difficult, especially when detectives already possess information you don't know they have. While the interview was taking place, Stephanie remained unaware of one critical fact. Investigators already believed the DNA evidence connected her to the crime scene. The interview wasn't designed to discover a suspect. The interview was designed to strengthen an existing case. Detectives were not fishing for possibilities. They were testing reactions, evaluating explanations, looking for anything that might help them understand what happened in 1986. And perhaps most importantly, they wanted to see whether Stephanie would provide information only the person responsible should know. That possibility made every answer important. Every sentence mattered. Every response was carefully documented. Because by this stage, investigators believed they were getting closer than anyone had ever been to solving the case. One of the most famous moments in this entire investigation happened outside the interview room. And it involved something remarkably ordinary: a drink. During the meeting, Stephanie used a disposable cup. After the interview ended, detectives quietly collected it. To most people, it was rubbish, something destined for a bin. To investigators, it was potentially priceless evidence. Because when people drink from a cup, they often leave behind biological material, material that can be analyzed, material that can be compared, material that can answer questions. The cup was sent for testing, and when the results came back, they provided exactly what investigators had hoped for. The DNA profile matched. The evidence from the crime scene and the evidence from Stephanie Lazarus pointed to the same individual. After more than 20 years, detectives finally had what they believed was a breakthrough. A genuine breakthrough. Not a theory, not speculation. Evidence. Following the DNA results, investigators accelerated their efforts. The case that had once appeared impossible to solve suddenly felt very different. For years it had been a mystery. Now it was becoming a prosecution. The focus shifted from identifying a suspect to proving guilt beyond reasonable doubt. Every report was reviewed. Every timeline was re-examined. Every piece of evidence was scrutinized. Prosecutors prepared for what would inevitably become a high-profile case. After all, this wasn't merely a homicide investigation anymore. It involved a serving police officer, a fact that guaranteed intense public interest. News organizations would eventually cover every development. Former colleagues would be shocked. Friends would struggle to process the allegations. And Sherri's family would finally see movement in a case that had haunted them for decades. But one major moment still remained: the arrest. The moment investigators would officially confront the woman they believed was responsible. The moment a 23-year mystery would take a dramatic turn. And once that happened, there would be no going back. On June 3, 2009, investigators made their move. Stephanie Lazarus was taken into custody. For many people involved in the case, it felt surreal. 23 years earlier, Sherri Rasmussen had lost her life. Many believed justice would never come. Many believed the truth might never be known. Yet now, suddenly, the case was back in headlines, back in court, back in the public eye. The arrest shocked California. It shocked law enforcement, and it shocked countless people who had followed the mystery over the years. But despite the arrest, one enormous question remained unanswered. What had actually happened inside that townhouse? What truly occurred on February 24th, 1986, and why? In the next part of our story, prosecutors finally reveal the theory they believe explains everything. A theory involving jealousy, obsession, resentment, and a confrontation that changed multiple lives forever. For the first time, we'll examine the sequence of events investigators believe unfolded behind closed doors on the day Sherri Rasmussen lost her life. And the picture they paint is both tragic and deeply unsettling. For more than 2 decades, one question haunted everyone connected to this case. What actually happened inside the townhouse on February 24th, 1986? The crime scene existed. The evidence existed. The victim existed. But the story itself remained hidden. Only one person truly knew what had happened. And for years, that person wasn't talking. As prosecutors prepared for trial, they began assembling what they believed was the most likely explanation. A reconstruction of events based on evidence, witness testimony, forensic analysis, and years of investigation. No surveillance cameras captured the incident. No eyewitnesses observed the entire sequence of events. But prosecutors believed the evidence told a clear story. And according to that story, this was never a burglary. It was something much more personal. According to prosecutors, the roots of this case stretched back years before the crime itself. Back before John married Sherri. Back to a relationship that, at least officially, had already ended. When relationships end, people usually move forward. Sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes months, sometimes longer. But eventually most people build new lives. They find closure, they accept reality, and they continue. Prosecutors believed that may not have happened here. Instead, they argued that Stephanie Lazarus remained emotionally attached to John long after their relationship was over. Not necessarily in a dramatic way, not necessarily every day, but enough that his marriage represented something painful, something difficult to accept, something that continued to matter. The key word prosecutors used repeatedly was jealousy. Not ordinary jealousy, not temporary jealousy, but the kind that quietly grows over time, the kind that can distort reality, the kind that convinces someone another person is standing in the way of the life they deserve. And according to prosecutors, that jealousy eventually focused on one person, Sherri Rasmussen. Investigators believe that on the day of the incident, the person responsible went to the townhouse. Why? That remains one of the unanswered questions. There was no recording, no written explanation, no confession. But prosecutors believed a confrontation occurred. A confrontation that was never supposed to happen. Or at least not in the way it unfolded. Perhaps there was an argument. Perhaps there were accusations. Perhaps emotions escalated. Nobody can know every detail. But evidence suggested a struggle took place, and that struggle was intense. Investigators believe Sherri fought back, hard. This is important because it speaks to her character. Even in an unexpected and frightening situation, she resisted. She defended herself. She did everything she could. The physical evidence suggested she refused to give up, and that resistance may ultimately have preserved the very evidence that solved the case decades later. In a strange and tragic way, Sherri helped identify the person responsible, even though she would never live to see it happen. After the confrontation, investigators believe the scene was altered. This is where the burglary theory enters the story. Remember how detectives originally believed intruders had entered the home? Well, prosecutors argued that appearance was intentional. They believed someone wanted investigators to see a burglary, wanted investigators to stop looking deeper, wanted investigators to focus on unknown criminals rather than personal relationships. When investigators later reviewed photographs from the crime scene, several details supported this possibility. The disruption inside the house didn't entirely match what detectives typically expected from a genuine burglary. Some items appeared disturbed, others did not. Certain choices seemed unusual, almost selective, almost deliberate. Again, this doesn't mean the staging was obvious. Far from it. It worked for decades. But once investigators abandoned the burglary theory and looked at the evidence through a different lens, the scene began telling a very different story. One of the most controversial questions surrounding this case is simple. How did investigators miss this? How did a case remain unsolved for more than 20 years when evidence eventually pointed toward a suspect connected to the victim's husband? The answer isn't simple. Some critics argue investigators became too focused on the burglary theory. Others believe important leads weren't pursued aggressively enough. Some point to cognitive bias. Others point to institutional failures. There are probably elements of truth in all those explanations. What seems clear is that once investigators accepted the burglary narrative, alternative explanations received less attention than they should have. And when that happens, investigations can drift off course, not because people are intentionally ignoring evidence, but because they stop asking the right questions. In the Rasmussen case, that mistake may have delayed justice by decades. When the case finally reached court, public interest exploded. People couldn't believe what they were hearing. The story sounded almost unbelievable. A respected young nurse, a decades-old cold case, a police officer accused of being responsible. DNA evidence, jealousy, obsession. It sounded like a Hollywood screenplay, except it was real. Prosecutors presented forensic evidence, witness testimony, historical records, timelines, relationships. Every piece of information they believed connected the suspect to the crime. Meanwhile, the defense challenged those conclusions. They questioned interpretations. They questioned assumptions. They challenged the prosecution's narrative. As happens in every major trial, two competing versions of reality emerged, and ultimately, it would be up to a jury to decide which version they believed. Throughout the proceedings, one group carried a burden heavier than anyone else: Sherri's family. Imagine waiting 23 years for answers, 23 years of wondering, 23 years of anniversaries, 23 years of birthdays, 23 years of imagining what your loved one's life might have looked like if that day had never happened. For them, the trial wasn't about headlines, it wasn't about publicity, it wasn't about legal arguments. It was about Sherri, the daughter they lost, the sister they lost, the future they lost. And after decades of uncertainty, They were finally closer than ever to learning whether someone would be held accountable. But before that could happen, the jury would need to reach a decision. And in the next part of our story, we arrive at the conclusion of one of the longest-running murder investigations in Los Angeles history. The verdict, the aftermath, and the lessons this extraordinary case still teaches today. For more than 20 years, the truth remained hidden. Now it was finally about to be revealed. For 23 years, the Rasmussen family lived with uncertainty, not knowing, wondering, questioning, hoping. For 23 years, they carried photographs instead of answers, memories instead of justice. And while the world moved on, they remained trapped in a moment that began on February 24th, 1986. Now, at last, the case was approaching its conclusion. But before a verdict could be reached, the jury had a difficult task ahead. They had to decide whether the evidence presented in court was enough to prove what prosecutors had argued all along: that Sherri Rasmussen was not the victim of a random burglary, that she had been specifically targeted, and that the person responsible had hidden in plain sight for more than 2 decades. Trials often move slowly. Days become weeks. Witnesses testify. Experts explain evidence. Attorneys challenge one another's conclusions. And eventually, everything comes down to one moment. The jury deliberates. For the Rasmussen family, those hours must have felt endless. Every possibility would have been running through their minds. What if the jury wasn't convinced? What if the years had damaged the case? What if justice slipped away again? After all, 23 years is a very long time. Many cases become harder to prove as evidence ages. Witnesses forget details. Memories fade. Uncertainty grows. Yet, despite those challenges, prosecutors believed the evidence was strong. The DNA evidence, the history between the people involved, the circumstances surrounding the crime. Taken together, they argued it painted a clear picture. Eventually, the jury reached its decision, and after decades of questions, a verdict was finally announced. Stephanie Lazarus was found guilty. For the Rasmussen family, it was a moment they had waited more than 2 decades to hear. Not because it erased their loss. Nothing could do that. But because it finally provided an answer that had been missing for most of their adult lives. Following the conviction, Stephanie Lazarus received a lengthy prison sentence. The woman who had once worked as a police officer now found herself on the opposite side of the justice system. The contrast was striking. For years, she had participated in investigations. Now she was the subject of one. For years, she had represented authority. Now a jury had determined she was responsible for a crime that had remained hidden for decades. The case quickly became one of the most discussed law enforcement scandals in California, not only because of the crime itself, but because of the extraordinary path the investigation had taken. A cold case, a police officer, DNA evidence, a 23-year delay. It was the kind of story people struggle to believe until they see the evidence for themselves. One person many viewers naturally wonder about is John Ruetten, the man at the center of the relationship that prosecutors argued motivated the crime. After losing his wife in 1986, John faced a reality few people can imagine. One ordinary day transformed the rest of his life. For years, he lived without answers. For years, he watched investigators pursue theories that ultimately led nowhere. For years, he carried the emotional weight of a tragedy that remained unresolved. Then, more than 2 decades later, the case suddenly reopened. The investigation shifted. A suspect emerged. An arrest followed. And eventually, a conviction. While the legal proceedings provided answers, they could never restore what had been taken from him. No verdict could bring Sherri back. No sentence could replace the future they had planned together. The life they intended to build ended before it truly began. And that reality remained unchanged regardless of what happened in court. In many true crime stories, the investigation becomes so fascinating that people forget the victim. The clues become the focus. The suspects become the focus. The mystery becomes the focus. But this story began with Sherri Rasmussen, and that's where it should end. Because before she became part of a criminal investigation, she was a person, a daughter, a sister, a friend, a nurse, a woman who worked hard, a woman who cared deeply about others, a woman with plans for the future. When people who knew Sherri spoke about her, they rarely focused on the crime. They focused on her personality, her intelligence, her kindness, her determination. The life she lived mattered far more than the way it ended. And perhaps that is the most important thing to remember. Because while investigations eventually become history, families never stop missing the people they lose. The Rasmussen case teaches several important lessons. First, assumptions can be dangerous. The original burglary theory appeared convincing, so convincing that it shaped the investigation for years. Yet, ultimately, it wasn't the complete story. Second, technology changes everything. Evidence that seemed impossible to interpret in 1986 became crucial decades later. Without advances in DNA analysis, this case may never have been solved. And finally, some cases simply refuse to disappear, even after 23 years, even after hope seems lost, even after countless dead ends. Sometimes, evidence waits patiently for the right moment, and when that moment arrives, the truth finally emerges. No matter how long it takes. Imagine being Sherri's family. Imagine spending 23 years wondering what happened. Imagine hearing theories come and go. Imagine watching time pass while answers remain out of reach. And then imagine finally learning the truth. It doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't undo the loss. But it ends the uncertainty. And sometimes that matters more than people realize. The story of Sherri Rasmussen is ultimately a story about persistence. The persistence of a family. The persistence of investigators who refused to let the case disappear. And perhaps most importantly, the persistence of evidence. Because while people can hide secrets, evidence has a way of waiting. Waiting for technology. Waiting for investigators. Waiting for the day someone finally asks the right questions. And in this case, that day eventually came. After 23 years, the truth finally caught up. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most remarkable cold cases in American criminal history, make sure to subscribe to BrightDawn's True Crime. We cover mysterious disappearances, solved and unsolved cases, criminal investigations, cold cases, and the stories behind some of the world's most fascinating true crime mysteries. If you found this story interesting, leave a comment below and let me know. Do you think the case could have been solved much earlier if investigators had looked beyond the burglary theory? Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay curious. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous secrets are the ones hiding in plain sight.